Hello, my name is Kay. Welcome to Art Book Nook, where I share with you my amazing collection of art and craft books. I've been given kind permission by the author and artist Harriet de Winton to review You'll Be Able to Paint with Watercolour by the end of this book. It's a structured guide with 20 step-by-step tutorials that covers everything a complete beginner needs to know to get started in watercolour. I'm really looking forward to sharing this one with you, not least because I'm fairly new to watercolour myself, and I know how frustrating this medium can be, especially if, like me, you're used to working in oils, acrylics or pastels. I'm sure Harriet's book will deliver on its promise. She's no stranger to teaching watercolour. She has a number of watercolour teaching platforms for you to learn from, including YouTube and Patreon, and a number of previously published books to her name. Here we have a very detailed contents page. There are 160 pages in Harriet's lovely book, printed on high-quality matte paper. In the introduction, Harriet says watercolour isn't just about proficiently following tutorials, it's also about joy and risk-taking. This book, she explains, is designed to awaken your artistic confidence and help you discover your own unique style. In how to use this book, Harriet shares that she's a self-taught artist, and the techniques she describes are all tried and tested by her, but as she points out, they're not the only way to do things. Other artists will have different approaches, and that there's no right or wrong. This book is aimed at both beginners and those with some experience who'd like to brush up on their skills. The first half covers the essentials, putting together a basic kit and learning the fundamentals of using watercolour. The tutorial section includes detailed step-by-step projects, and Harriet clearly shows which colours and brushes to use so you can follow along with confidence. This is followed by sections on colour swatches, common slip-ups and what you can learn from them, and a series of prompts to encourage you to create your own variations on a theme. In essential materials, Harriet keeps things really simple. She starts with just 3 colours of watercolour paint and 3 round brushes, which she lists for you on the right-hand page. She also explains the anatomy of a brush and includes helpful notes on paper, pencils and palettes. In How Much Water, Harriet explains that water is the vehicle for the colour, and she answers the familiar question, how to paint with the right amount of water. She talks about control and timing and includes a practical exercise on the right-hand page to introduce techniques such as wet on wet, blooms, dry brushing and creating hard edges. So now you've got a sense of how much water you need, what about paint? In How Much Paint, Harriet often compares watercolour paint to food colouring. You only need a tiny amount. She credits the renowned watercolourist Joseph Zabukvik and expands on his chart for paint consistency, helping you understand how the ratio of paint to water changes the strength and transparency of your washes. In How to Paint, Harriet gives you the chance to paint freely with no end goal other than to fill every corner of a page. This is a wonderful warm-up exercise where you'll come across some basic techniques and see what the pointed round brushes can do. Harriet then shows you how to paint a variety of leaf shapes, followed by petals and simple forms. She also explains techniques such as glazing and layering, helping you to see how these build depth and interest. In the terminology section, Harriet explains you'll see certain words and phrases used throughout her book, so she's included a helpful set of definitions to guide you. Harriet's book explores all sorts of ways to apply paint to paper, but everything comes back to 3 fundamentals of watercolour painting, which she calls the Big 3. These are dry on dry, wet on dry and wet on wet. She's included a simple exercise using 3 basic shapes, a square, a triangle and a circle, so you can experiment with each technique for yourself. Water is the key to achieving light and dark shades in watercolour, otherwise known as value. One colour can create a wide range of values simply by adding more or less water. Here Harriet includes a tutorial called One Colour Seaweed to help you practice this concept. There's a saying that value does all the work and colour gets the credit. Learning to create good contrast and tonal value in your paintings, whatever the medium, is one of the most important skills you will ever develop. There's no better starting point for colour mixing than the three primaries. For this tutorial, Harriet has chosen alizarin crimson, French ultramarine and cadmium-free yellow. She encourages you to create a swatch chart as a handy reference. It's a really good exercise to do when you're not feeling especially creative and you don't know what to paint. You'll quickly discover that not all primary colours are equal. If you swap out alizarin crimson for cadmium red, you'll end up with completely different mixes. From my own personal experience, time spent mixing colour and creating swatches or charts is never wasted. It saves time, money and a great deal of frustration and disappointment in the long run. The oil painter, Richard Schmid, who sadly is no longer with us, he wrote books about colour mixing and the value of colour charts to help you. And the wonderful John Potoshnik, with whom I had the pleasure of studying with, has 2 excellent DVDs and a book dedicated to the same subject. So you may be wondering, what have Richard and John, oil painters, got to do with watercolour painting? Well, the point I'm trying to make is that I strongly encourage you to take the time to follow Harriet's colour mixing tutorial. I know it's tempting to jump straight into painting a scene, but the time you spend here, learning to mix colours, controlling your brush and understanding value, will pay real dividends when you move on to the projects in the rest of Harriet's book. We've now come to an exercise for one of the big 3 as Harriet describes it, wet on wet flowers. It's one of the more unruly techniques, and the results you get depend on several factors: the consistency of your paint, how damp the paper is, and the timing of when you drop in your colours. The finished bouquet looks really lovely, doesn't it? On the right-hand page, Harriet explains the difference between hue, intensity and value, and how you can dull a colour down by mixing it with its complement. Here we have the first detailed project, a bee. I have to say, I love painting bees. I'll explain how Harriet has structured this one, but as we move through the rest of the book, I'll simply mention what each project is about or covers and highlight any key lessons. Harriet has explained everything so clearly that I'd only be repeating her words otherwise. So first, Harriet explains what level of skill is recommended for each project, and in this case, the bee is suitable for beginners. She then lists the paint colours you'll need, the brushes, and any additional items such as an HB pencil and an eraser. Next, and I think this is really helpful, Harriet includes a colour mixers section for both the stripes and the wings. She tells you exactly which colours to use, and in the case of the delicate wings, even how much to dilute the mix, which in this case is to about 10%, along with detailed mixing notes. In the project steps, Harriet virtually holds your hand as she guides you through the drawing and painting process. For example, step 2 says, paint the body in dilute yellow. While still damp, outline each body section in more concentrated yellow. The pale middle creates a rounded body. Allow to dry. I honestly don't think you can ask for clearer guidance than that, do you? But Harriet doesn't stop there. She also encourages you to paint what she calls loosened up bees and to experiment with different colour mixes to create all sorts of other little bugs and critters. I think the way Harriet has written and structured her tutorial is excellent. It's one of the very best I've seen in any of my many watercolour books so far. Harriet explains that washes are simply expanses of dilute watercolour on unpainted paper. You can add colour and gradients to create skies, sunsets or seascapes. Later in Harriet's book, you'll come across glazes, a very exciting technique in watercolour. Here, though, Harriet introduces different types of washes: flat, gradient, variegated and wet on wet. She also includes a section on common slip-ups and how you can avoid them. Here are several fun exercises and prompts to help you practice your washes. Things like painting colourful ice lollies, How many different ones can you create? Or dropping colour into petal shapes and watching the colour feather out. I won't give them all away. If you'd like to discover the rest, there's a link in the description below where you can get your own personal copy of Harriet's very well crafted book. Here Harriet explains more about colour harmony, a term you've probably heard mentioned before. She talks about complementary colours, how to choose colours to match a reference, whether from life or a photograph, and how to build a painting from a swatch of colours that you've created for yourself. Without contrast, paintings are flat and lifeless. Everything in life has form, and here Harriet explains how to make things appear three-dimensional. She's chosen a round tomato for this tutorial, which is structured in exactly the same way as the bee tutorial. But it's not just about painting oranges or lemons or tomatoes. Everything has a three-dimensional form. In addition to form, every object also has a texture. In this tutorial entitled 4 Fruits, you'll learn how to paint a shiny cherry, a hairy kiwi, a dimpled lemon and a velvety fig. I recently attended an exhibition of paintings by John Singer Sargent, and his work was breathtaking. He could capture velvet, satin, fur, lace and chiffon so convincingly that you almost wanted to reach out and touch it. It's easy to forget that what you don't paint can be just as important as what you do paint. Dry brushing, lifting and blotting are 3 useful techniques that celebrate the absence of paint. And here is an exercise, a simple landscape, where you can put all 3 techniques into practice. This tutorial, Oranges on a Branch, is an exercise in using complementary colours. These are colours on the opposite sides of the colour wheel. This means they can be used to great effect in compositions, working in harmony together. They can also be used to desaturate one another and create really effective shadows. Just look at Harriet's final painting. Don't those oranges look real? Now this is where it starts to get really exciting, as Harriet introduces you to glazing and layering. Watercolour paintings are often built up in many layers, starting with light washes and gradually adding depth. Watercolour paints themselves can be opaque, semi-transparent or fully transparent, and the more transparent the paint, the better it is for glazing. Transparent layers act like filters, adding luminosity to a painting. You can use them to gently warm areas up or cool them down. Harriet's shell tutorial is the perfect subject to experiment with glazes and layers. Shells come in all sorts of shapes and textures, from knobbly and rough to pearlescent and smooth, so you can really have fun exploring the possibilities here. And Harriet has a tutorial on her YouTube channel where she paints the scallop shell from her book. I've actually watched this tutorial myself all the way through, and I have to say it's excellent. So I've added a link for you in the description below in the About Harriet section. Harriet shares helpful advice on how to stop and start a painting. You wouldn't think it'd be that difficult, would you? But so often we're blocked in our tracks by that blank sheet of paper or canvas staring back at us, and then once we finally get going we can't seem to stop, adding more and more until we lose the freshness we had at the beginning. I want to get better at painting. How often have you said that to yourself? In taking your painting further, Harriet offers practical advice to help you do just that, expanding on everything she's covered in the earlier chapters. Harriet begins by introducing her extended palette of 23 colours, along with different sizes and shapes of watercolour brushes, and she explains when and why you might use each one. Now that you have a broader range of colours to choose from, Harriet encourages you to get to know them by creating a new series of colour swatches, just as you did with the 3 primaries back on page 28. Once you understand how these new colours behave and interact, she introduces a wet in wet exercise in colour blending so you can put your newfound knowledge into practice. Harriet sees pencil drawing as the supporting act to her watercolour paintings. If your drawing includes every tiny detail, your painting can easily turn into a colouring in exercise. Worse, paint by numbers. This beginner level project shows you how to draw the outline of a cat and then use the wet in wet technique to bring it to life with colour. I did chuckle at Harriet's fuzzy wet on wet black cat. It reminded me of a Tom and Jerry cartoon, right after Tom's just received an electric shock. Here Harriet explains how to make your animal paintings look more realistic through layering and glazing. She also answers a very common question: can you erase pencil after you've painted over it? You'll find her answer on page 71. Here we have a lovely exercise where Harriet shows you how to draw with a brush. It's such a simple but elegant technique, and it reminds me of traditional Chinese brush painting. It also leads nicely in to a tutorial, Sweet Peas with Loose Lines, which is beginner level, and you can create a beautiful painting of a vase of sweet peas. Here Harriet offers some insightful advice on finding your own style and encourages you to experiment. She illustrates this with several versions of a simple tomato, painted 10 different ways, using a variety of techniques and methods of applying the paint. We learn the basics of watercolour because, as Harriet reminds us, sometimes the basics are all we need, and there are moments when simplicity is key. In this next exercise, you'll paint a tree in 2 ways, first in a simple loose style and then in a more detailed approach, and you can observe how each creates a very different mood. The most natural looking floral compositions will have flowers at a variety of angles, and here Harriet explains how to achieve that. And this leads into a beginner-friendly tutorial painting a sprig of asters. I do love asters. They're such a pretty, delicate flower, especially in autumn when everything else in the garden is starting to wind down for winter. Harriet now shows you how to add depth and luminosity to your paintings through layering and glazing. The tutorial Detailed Cosmos is classed as intermediate level, and by this stage, if you've been working through this book, you should feel ready to give this one a try. Adding shadow heightens contrast and brings a painting to life on the page. Harriet shows you how to add shadow to objects to give them form, and how to paint cast shadows to anchor objects to the ground. Cast shadows can be soft or hard depending on the lighting conditions, and Harriet explains which technique to use to achieve that result. This beginner tutorial of a garlic bulb makes an ideal subject to paint entirely in highlights and lowlights. Your dark glazes might feel a little too strong at first for such a delicate subject, but Harriet reminds us that watercolour dries about 30% lighter than when it's first applied. Although Harriet includes ivory black in her palette, it's rarely the colour she reaches for when painting black feathers or animal fur, and she never uses it for shadows. When you look closely at black objects, you'll notice they often contain other colours, such as flashes of electric blue and subtle highlights. In this beginner tutorial of a panda, Harriet demonstrates how to lift and enrich black tones, making them far more lively and realistic. Underpainting forms the base layer of a watercolour, and your choice can dramatically change the mood and overall look of a painting. Harriet illustrates this by painting the same butterfly twice, first directly onto plain white paper and then again over an underpainting wash of cadmium-free yellow and Payne's grey. It's fascinating, isn't it, to see how every colour in the butterfly has been influenced by the base wash beneath it. We've learned that one of the easiest ways to create a harmonious colour palette is to work with a small limited group of colours. In this exercise, you'll paint a butterfly using an analogous palette, selecting colours that sit side by side on the colour wheel. And here we have the butterfly painted using a complementary palette, colours that sit opposite one another on the colour wheel. And Harriet asks, do you think this works? This leads us into an intermediate tutorial featuring a meadow brown butterfly, followed by a more colourful peacock butterfly. Both are lovely studies to explore colour contrast and variation. Harriet shares that she has the luxury of time. She practices often and only shares the best versions of her paintings. Over these pages, she showed us pieces created on a first attempt, produced within a strict time limit, such as 30 seconds, 1 minute, 5 minutes and 10 minutes, and she's written about how she felt about each finished piece. These paintings remind me of my lovely dad, who has sadly passed. He was someone with many interests throughout his life and always had a new hobby on the go, one of which was breeding Siamese fighting fish, sometimes called betta fish. I was about 9 years old at the time and we were living in Singapore. We had a large tropical fish tank and I was fascinated by these fish, how they moved and their beautiful colours. I've added a link in the bonus section of the description below to a YouTube video about how these incredible fish breed. It's absolutely fascinating. Lovebirds have wonderfully vibrant feathers and lend themselves just as well to a loose wet in wet style of painting as they do to a slower, more detailed dry approach. Harriet includes 2 tutorials for you to try, a detailed lovebird and a loosely painted lovebird. It's an effective way to compare the two styles side by side. Earlier in the book, Harriet introduced the idea that black isn't necessarily the darkest colour in your palette. Here she encourages you to explore the colour black further and see what other colours you can find within it. The Eurasian magpie is the perfect subject for this. Its feathers catch flashes of electric blue and green. It would be lovely, wouldn't it, to try a few shimmering iridescent paints here. Harriet explains how to preserve the white of your paper and pale colours by using masking fluid. In this beginner tutorial of an aspen forest, the trees in the foreground are masked before painting begins, ensuring they stay pure white in the final piece. Harriet says that every time she paints white snowdrops, she discovers something new. This tutorial is classed as intermediate level, but by now you'll have the necessary skills to give this a go with confidence. Harriet also has several tutorials on her YouTube channel showing you exactly how to paint these lovely flowers. Well worth watching if you'd like a little extra guidance or inspiration. Over the next few projects, you'll begin to bring together all the techniques you've practiced so far. This still life, a vase of kumquats, also introduces a new skill, how to paint glass effects in watercolour. It's very realistic, isn't it? In the sunny window box tutorial, you'll be painting a different kind of glass, window panes. This might look a little complex at first, but Harriet guides you through it step by step, with clear instructions on mixing the colours, where to apply the masking fluid, and which sizes of brush she recommends. The final painting is just lovely, isn't it? Landscape painting is all about creating the illusion of depth and distance. Here Harriet explains how to divide your composition into a foreground, middle ground and background, and how to make each area work together. And you can practice this in Harriet's tutorial called Sunrise on the Marshes. Perspective plays an important part in landscape painting, and here Harriet explains one-point perspective, where all the lines converge towards a single vanishing point on the horizon. It's the simplest way to show how objects appear smaller the further away they are. You can practice this illusion in Harriet's Orchard Landscape tutorial, which is a lovely exercise in depth and distance. I apologise for the fumbling. We're coming to the last few pages of Harriet's book now. Horizon lines and vanishing points form the foundations for drawing structures like buildings, but Harriet reminds us that not everything needs to be perfectly straight. You can turn rigid lines into charming cottages simply by softening the edges or adding a few gentle wobbles. I once lived in a little cottage that was over 300 years old. The upstairs was slightly larger than the downstairs because the walls leaned outwards and one end was narrower than the other. They didn't have building regulations 300 years ago, did they? Negative space in landscapes can create all sorts of structural detail. What you choose not to paint can have just as much impact as what you do paint. Harriet illustrates this in her lovely tutorial, Blue Sky and Mountain Range, where the unpainted areas help to define the light, distance and atmosphere of the scene. In the final pages of Harriet's book, she shares her experiences to help you grow as an artist. She reassures you that everyone goes through peaks and troughs of creativity. There will be days when you will struggle, and other days when everything flows just as you hoped. On the not-so-good days, she recommends simply going for a walk and switching off for a while. It's also a wonderful idea to keep a sketchbook handy. That way you can jot down ideas or make quick colour notes whenever inspiration strikes. Harriet has included a few of her own sketches here. I particularly love the one of the purple flowers in the Lyle's golden syrup tin, bottom right. Having worked your way through Harriet's book and all her tutorials, she now offers a few suggestions to help you start creating your own original work. One idea is to choose a familiar object and paint several variations of it. Harriet has painted a lovely collection of lamps. Do you have any ideas of your own? If so, please share them in the comments below. It might help to inspire someone else watching this video. One idea that instantly sprang to mind for me was perfume bottles. In a previous life, I was a product designer, and it might surprise you to know that quite often the bottle and packaging costs more to produce than the perfume itself. And finally, Harriet asks, what does your art say about you? She encourages you to write down a few lines about what you would like to paint and why. I thought about this myself, and I've realised I love to paint impressionistic landscapes, especially skies and winter scenes. Harriet also shares her own thoughts on this, here on page 157, but you'll have to buy a copy of her book to find out. I've added a link in the description below. If you use that link, it helps to support Art Book Nook at no extra cost to you. So to conclude, Harriet makes quite a bold claim in the title of this book. You will be able to paint with watercolour by the end of this book. Do I agree with her? Well, yes, I genuinely do. Harriet's book isn't just practical, it's exceptionally well structured and thoughtfully written. I can honestly say it's one of the best watercolour books for beginners and improvers that I currently have in my own collection. In the description below, I've linked to Harriet's website, where she offers all sorts of learning opportunities, as well as her YouTube channel, which now has over 1,100 videos, and her Patreon page too. What a fantastic set of resources to accompany her book. Harriet has a strong online presence, and I've also included links to her social media channels if you'd like to explore more of her work. Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this review of You'll Be Able to Paint with Watercolour by the End of This Book by Harriet de Winton. If you've read the book or you plan to, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video helpful, please do give it a like or a hype. It really helps other people who are interested in art and art books discover my channel. And if you enjoy calm and thoughtful reviews of art and craft books, along with the odd creative tutorial, I'd be delighted if you'd subscribe and join me here at Art Book Nook. So until next time, please take care and happy painting.